oppressed in our land built on liberty. And it's time to right the wrong and set us free.
Hello, I'm Frank Britton, one of 700,000 Washingtonians who are denied rights that people in the 50 states can take for granted. Not only are we denied a voice in our national government, but we have to put up with congressional interference in our D.C. government. The U.S. Constitution gives Congress ultimate authority over the federal district that is the seat of our national government. And in 1998, congressional interference made our serious AIDS epidemic even worse. In the 90s, AIDS was a terminal illness that often ended with an agonizing death. Advocates Wayne Turner and his partner, Steve Michael, had many friends who were suffering and dying from AIDS, and they realized that medical marijuana could ease the pain of an increasing number of patients if they could find a way to change D.C. law. Steve, who was HIV positive yet symptom-free, took the lead, and they decided to try to make the change through a ballot initiative.
But we knew at the onset that Congress was going to be a problem. We thought, wow, it would be really hard for Congress to overturn a vote of the people. Overturning a vote of 7 council members, Congress would do that at the drop of a hat, and of course they have done so. But a vote of the people, that would just be that would be a stretch. Going through the initiative process, ultimately it made it about the people of D.C. We got signatures one by one. We had conversations not just with 17,000 district residents, but with about 30,000. And we talked to people one-on-one and heard their concerns and addressed their concerns and recruited more supporters that way.
In the midst of engaging voters and collecting signatures, Steve became ill.
His condition, his medical condition, just really deteriorated really fast. Ultimately, he went to the ICU and was there for 3.5 weeks. He had multiple infections, including pneumocystis pneumonia. He was hooked to a ventilator. He was hooked up to IVs like a human pincushion, and he died. What Steve said before he went into the ICU and before he went on the ventilator was that he said, save the initiative. Save that initiative. Make sure that gets on the ballot. And so in many ways that was my mission and my promise and my obligation. And really that's when people really came together. And we got probably 2/3 of our signatures in the 6 weeks after Steve died. It was quite a struggle to go through the signature verification process and ensure that all of our signatures were verified. We ultimately qualified for the November ballot. Very exciting time.
While the medical marijuana supporters were organizing their election campaign, Congress was exercising its authority to decide how we could spend our local tax dollars. During debates on the D.C. budget, Congressman Bob Barr from Georgia proposed an amendment about our election.
Do not single the people I represent out. Do not do to district residents what you cannot do to other Americans. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
By the time the D.C. budget was approved by the Senate and signed by the President, it was mid-October, and thousands of ballots with the medical marijuana initiative had been printed. On Election Day, 69% of the voters approved the initiative, but it took almost a year and a court order to get the results released. It took 9 years to get the prohibition against medical marijuana removed from the district's annual budget and 12 years before legal marijuana was available to patients in D.C. Because AIDS prevention was a priority in the 90s, our government had a program of providing clean needles to IV drug users in order to prevent the spread of AIDS through sharing of needles. But Congressman Tad Tiahrt of Kansas did not want this in our budget.
This amendment, Mr. Chairman, will restrict any funds from being used to distribute sterile needles or syringes to people who abuse drugs. It's commonly called the Needle Exchange Program.
Come to Baltimore, which has a similar program as this one. We are saving lives. And so I say to you, I beg you, that as this debate goes forward, understand that there are people who are dying, and all of the amendments that we've had so far will not save lives. But this one, this amendment, if it goes through, will kill people. And that's a fact. And so I yield back the balance of my time.
The amendment did go through, and tragically, Congressman Cummings was right. Many people did die. Finally, by 2008, Congress stopped imposing the budget amendment barring a needle exchange program on D.C. By that time, D.C.'s rate of AIDS infection had arguably become the worst of any city in the United States. But several years later, after the return of our needle exchange program, the average monthly rate of new HIV infections decreased by about 70%. Congressional interference is still a fact of life in D.C. and will be until we become a state. The remedy is statehood for the residential and commercial areas of the District of Columbia. As you can see from this map, our nation's capital will still be in a federal district. This district will include everything people in the 50 states associate with Washington, the U.S. Capitol, the Supreme Court, the White House, the National Mall, and key national parks and monuments. The way statehood can happen for the people of D.C. is the way it has happened for every state except the original 13, an act of Congress. We are pleased that we now have record support in both houses of Congress for statehood, but our supporters are not yet a majority. And that is where you come in. We in D.C. need you to let your senators and representatives know that you want statehood for the people of D.C.
The freedoms that make our country great are enjoyed by those in all the 50 states, but we've been left behind.